Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine, Taylor-Klaus, and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to the next and most exciting, not most of the day, but today's exciting conversation, the first of the day, with Marvyn Harrison. Marvyn, we are so excited to have you here. Many of you may know him as Dope Black Dad. He is a broadcaster, podcast, and a really authentic guy who has been on this journey of discovering ADHD. And so we thought it would be a nice kind of different spin to bring him to join us to talk about the journey of going from being an undiagnosed kid with ADHD to a dope black dad who's discovered his ADHD. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so enamored by you both. I feel like I want to come visit for some sort of tea, dinner. I want to come visit.
That would be lovely.
We would love to have you come in.
We had a tea time with all of our professionals last week. It was really fun.
Next time that is happening, I'm flying.
Okay. There we go.
Great. We have professionals from all over the world, and we all just got together one afternoon last week and had tea. It was quite
amazing.
Thank
you. Marvyn, start us with the backstory. Like, how did you get where you are and do what you do? And you'll tell us what you do, more about what you do in the process of that.
Yeah, why are we talking to you? Why did we find you across the pond?
It's always an interesting backstory because when we look at it through the lens of ADHD, obviously being ADHD my whole life and not having any idea until a year ago, it definitely shaped a large part of how far I got before I started questioning certain things. And so my core job is that I have an agency that does cultural transformation and cultural marketing. So we teach people about DEI, we teach people about human strategy and how to change their internal working cultures from one thing to another. And that's including that education and training strategy. But alongside that, I've had a parenting community for many, many years called Dope Black Dads, which launched in 2018 on Father's Day. And that was really as a consequence of being quite disassociated from the male parenting experience and not being sure why. As in, it's really weird when you want something, you're excited by something, you put all your effort into it, and then it comes out with no results. And that's not a feeling that I was familiar with in my life. Yeah. So I dug in and tried to understand it a lot more. I've also written children books inspired by conversations and games that I play with my children to help parents connect and then enhance their children's mental resilience. One is called I Love Me and the other one is called The Best Me. I'm also a broadcaster as well. So it started off talking about things around dope black dads, and that's masculinity, male parenting, mental health. And then it became like, actually, would you like to come back and talk about more things? Could you be on this panel? Could you be on this show? And so you become one of the many contributors and facilitators of great conversations around really important human challenges. That's something that I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite things to do as a pastime. And I feel like it allows me to reach way more people than I did historically. I also just think being a dad itself is a job if you're doing it right.
My husband likes to say it's the hardest work you'll ever do, but if you do the work, it's not hard at all.
Yes, exactly. It becomes something that it's my favorite experience on earth is to be a parent to amazing children. And inherently, they're now moving into a phase where they're running on their own fuel a lot. So it's really their inner voice of my words that I was doing most of the work after years of helping them and supporting them. So yeah, that's probably my greatest achievement.
How old are your kids? How many?
I have two kids. They're 6 and 8. My daughter Ocean is 6 and my son Blake is 8.
Beautiful. You think they're running on their own energy now.
Yeah, just wait. Just wait.
We both have young adults now, and our kids were that age when we started. So
Oh, wow.
it's
Yeah,
an amazing journey.
I'm so looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so cool.
When I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about the human journey, the human challenges. And I'm curious because you've been talking to a lot of dads, particularly over the last several years. What do you think it is about being a dad and being an adult with ADHD that either creates a sweet spot or a challenging spot, or maybe, I'm guessing, a combination of the two?
Well, I would say if you're talking about an intersectional dad experience, so just for dads, and I'll say this is most dads, most of it is a lack of association and connection to, especially your younger children in the earlier years. And I suppose a lot of parenting is very female normative from
Yeah.
the mother and obviously her giving birth. And so you kind of sit slightly outside of the center of the family unit for a large period of time. And a lot of men get disconnected and quite lonely in that time. I think when you get past that stage, it then just becomes about what's my contribution to this and answering that question. I think a lot of it is people feel that two parents are caring at the same time, but actually it's a tandem and different people do different things at different times. And
Yeah.
if you don't understand that, you will constantly feel displaced. If I was to talk about specifically from a Black parenting point of view, I would say the relationship with most of the institutions that guide and lead the country, or whatever country you're in, whether that's healthcare, law enforcement, employment, how much you get paid, types of jobs that you can do, family dynamics, generational wealth, all of those things add a different seasoning to the experience that you have and requires a different type of perspective, a different type of support. And so we focus on sort of group therapy, almost frameworks to combine everybody together, create a shared experience, but then upskill people into better outcomes. So each of those layers are slightly different. When you talk about ADHD, there's a lot around emotional regulation. There's a lot about impulsivity, which is what makes you amazing with your kids when you're playing and it's like throw them in the air and we're gonna,
Yep.
play. But I think other times when they need other skills from you, if you're not tapped in, you can show up as angry, you can show up as absent and not necessarily tuned in to their needs because you're on your phone or you're distracted from lots of different things. It makes it really hard in terms of relationships. So your co-parenting, your romantic relationships can be impacted. There's a lot of variables as an ADHD, then the racial impact, and then being just a male parent that it creates that isn't necessarily widely understood. And it can be quite lonely as a result.
That was just an amazing, like 3-minute encapsulation of the entire story of the challenge and the opportunity in this. Beautifully done, Marvyn.
It really was. It really was. Well, and I'm looking through and I tend to type what you're saying, like while you're, so I can see what the threads are. And you really did. You hit what it is to be a dad, what it is to be a Black dad, what it is to deal with ADHD as a dad. And then there's this intersection of all of them, right? And so maybe we pick it apart before we bring it together a little bit, because I'm particularly, actually, before we go there, let me just check in with what led to your late life for diagnosis that got you on this journey to understand ADHD at all, because most people who don't have experience with it don't understand emotional regulation and impulsivity. And those are all kind of catchwords in the realm of ADD. So what brought you to this world?
Yeah. So it started off in meeting the mother of my children, who was going to be my wife at the time. And I just was like, you're an incredible human being. And you are kind and you're thoughtful. You're a great mother. Even before we have kids, I knew. And so I knew that I had lots of rough things around the edges. And as much as I had done really well in the professional realm, personally, the centering, the anchoring, the balance, the patience, I wasn't very good at. I didn't understand why. I actually, when I first started doing therapy, was attributing it to growing up in low income families or low income communities where there can be a lot of violence. We saw prostitution, drug taking, drug selling, general violence, domestic abuses. We just saw them. That was just naturally around you in your eye line constantly. And then there was a lot of youth violence and male violence, which I saw and received as a matter of just growing up in those environments. And I thought it was those things that were coming out. And in a way it was, but I think there was other things at play. So the emotional dysregulation of my attention being so intensely on so many things all the time meant that when I was pushed outside of, what I expected interaction to be, I had very little capacity to regulate myself.
Yeah.
And so understanding that made me be much more precious about boundaries, much more precious about what I have the capacity to do successfully. And that came up in therapy, but I think it kind of came up too late to really, save my marriage almost, because I think a large part of you loving someone with ADHD is that you, one, need to know for it to even have any chance. And you both need to know, that helps. But I also think the other really important thing is they have to intentionally sign up for that experience, because it's a very specific experience in a relationship to do. And as much as we're still in a great space now, that wasn't the man that she was promised. And so only after the fact was I able to separate who I wanted to be versus just who I am, and be a bit more realistic about what I'm able to have the capacity to do.
That's so beautifully captured. And, Diane and I both have similar experience with exactly what you're describing with spouses with ADHD before we understood what it was or understood ADHD at all. For me, both of us have ADHD and we didn't know it in the early years. And we work with so many families who have unraveled in various ways because the ADHD is this other entity in the space that nobody understands, knows about, or acknowledges.
Well, and the thing I would add to that, Elaine, so Marvyn, just so you know, my current partner is an adult with ADHD. My ex-husband is an adult with ADHD. So I've got it on both sides. And one of the key things, and parents who are listening will know this, is that one of the key things about ADHD is that it's often inconsistent. And in a relationship that sort of, hey, you've always been like this, and then all of a sudden you're not, which is part of the way some humans show up with ADHD, is really hard to understand if you don't get that's part of ADHD.
Absolutely. And look, I really do have empathy for people who have discovered it in the middle of their relationship, because it's a huge thing to take on. For me, my answer was that I had to rebuild my life from scratch. It's based on what was possible. And I'm a very optimistic, even bordering naive at times in terms of my worldview. I really believe in people. I really believe in the best in. I really believe in love and romance. But I think as a consequence of that, and some of the things that I had developed that as a result of my ADHD, meant that I just had this almost unhealthy, realistic idea of meeting people who probably couldn't love me, and just believing that they would come around to love me one day. And the consequence was is that I never got the loving experience that I desired, or that I felt like I was worthy of. So it started to chip away at my own sense of self. And I couldn't even recognize myself in my old relationships. And then I had a hero complex as a result, just like I can save people, I can help people. I've gathered so much information from trying to understand myself. I can help others, and you try to help others, and it's just, it's overwhelming, and it's just not your place. So a lot has had to happen in a very short space of time to realign my life in a really healthy way, because I just felt I had taken on more than I could chew, and it was an unwinnable living experience for myself. Like there was no opportunity for me to have joy and be centered in any of the stuff I was doing.
Wow. It's such a profound way of looking at it. And I think often about what it is like to be courted by somebody with ADHD. And those early months when the promise is huge and the vision is extraordinary and the capacity.
The hyperfocus is there.
The hyperfocus is the best thing in the whole world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into dynamic in life, and it's the operational business of life that becomes so difficult to manage. And in any relationship, I think you're always dancing between the business of life and the being of life.
Mm.
And
What was really interesting is love bombing. Obviously, there's a lot of pop psychology language that's in society now, and everybody uses these words without much understanding or real meaning. And love bombing was one that was coming up, and I felt uncomfortable accepting it as just as straightforward as that. Like if you have ADHD, then that intensity of connection is something that you just do and how you want to exist.
right.
And asking myself is like, can we make it okay as is? I think so often like we put meaning into very natural behavior for a group of people and make it bad. So if the person participates and is with you and wants that experience, then the things that you promise largely happen and you're able to deliver on it. It's actually their resistance and lack of belief in it happening that creates the fracture at times. And I felt like
Mm.
I have been in those relationships where I've said, look, this is what I want to create for us. And it's their, probably the shock and disbelief in somebody saying it and then delivering against it that prevented them from coming along and participating along the vision with me. So I realized that being around neuronormative people is something that I have to be conscious about and make adjustment for. I have to adapt. I'm unable just to be, because many of the things that I see and I believe I can do and how the world works for me doesn't correlate, and you can create real fractures with people. And yeah, it's harder when there's an intersection of being a man as well, because that just means if a man is love bombing, it's very, very different. And it can feel coercive, it can feel manipulative, it can feel like it's a really negative experience. So I have to be present to when I'm in limerence to allow it to be, but not necessarily something to be shared. I still need to operate within the timescales of the person that I'm experiencing.
Taking responsibility for your impact is what I'm hearing from there. It's really being conscious of it. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. So as you became aware, and you've clearly done a lot of work, right? But you were only diagnosed with ADHD, you said, a year ago.
Yeah.
So as that awareness became clear to you, what started shifting for you?
Well, people really. There were some relationships that needed to end because their vision of me was trapping in many ways.
Yeah.
This is where, again, I think something where being a man is slightly different. And, people just expect men to show up as a particular narrow archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not able to do that, then you're not a good man or you're not a healthy man. And I felt the pressure of that meant that I wasn't able to be curious in the way that I was. And a lot of the relationships I had developed were about being this person. And I was fighting to be this person and to live up to those expectations, but mostly at the cost of my peace, my joy, my idea of who I was. And so when I said I don't want to do that anymore, obviously a lot of relationships fractured. So that process of breaking down relationships powerfully without fire I could probably do a whole book on that anyway. And that was a really powerful thing. And then I had to actually ask myself, who am I? Because I think there's an element of where, I've never really had this formally diagnosed or discussed, but like almost like a borderline personality disorder element arrives in you because you're adjusting so much to your surroundings that you never actually settle on who you truly are, on your instincts and just who you are from birth. It's always kind of an augmented version, a palatable version for other people. And so I wanted to go back and just shred everything. And I did. I spent time alone. I did a 10-day silent retreat. I intensified my therapy. I spent time with coaches and other leaders. And I traveled a lot more. And I rebuilt my idea of like, what feels good, what doesn't feel good? What's my boundary here? What's not my boundary here? And just started again. It was really liberating and powerful. But obviously for the people that were in my life before, they're really challenged by the idea that like, one day I just decided, in their view, one day I just decided that no more. And I just pulled away and started again. And they weren't at the center of it. And it was very hard for many other people.
I can imagine. And there's so many things that come to me from that, because as you're saying it, I'm remembering my first year, because I was diagnosed in my 40s as well, and my husband, and watching the journey that he went on, and then I went on, and I was diagnosed because my husband and all my kids have been diagnosed. So for me, I was the last one in. And so that capacity to realign who you are in relationship with people. And what you're saying is that there were some relationships that stayed and some you had to move from. And that what strikes me is you have small children. So somehow you had the capacity to do that.
Yeah, what's really funny is that one of my coaches, and I went through a couple of different programs. One of them was, you have to have five people that you can show up for, maximum five people you can show up. You're going to get on a plane for them. You're going to do whatever it takes. They have access to all the money they need, the time that they need. They walk up to you, you put your phone down, that type of relationship. And when I went through that five, it was to my two children, my mother of my children, and I had one really good friend that had accepted every version of me without question from the beginning. And I said, those are my anchoring group. And whatever happens, whatever they need, whatever version of Marvin they need, they get it. Then the next layer on that, it was just really this understanding of who do I want and what types of relationships do I want to build. So there's a framework called the intimacy framework, and it talks about you can have 6 or 8 different types of intimacy. And it was, where are you getting each of those intimacies from? And so now what I ask of people is that they fill one of those spaces. And it's clear to me, not to them. They can move out of it, because this is where the conversation of having narcissistic traits, where you meet people and you say, you're only allowed to be my friend for this reason. So it's really about, for me, I understood when I wanted to, go into nature, who's my experiential friend that's spiritual, that I can go sit with and go for a walk in the woods with. And that's what I started to rebuild my circles based on. And I found it, for how my brain works, incredibly useful and powerful to have things in frameworks, lists, to identify who and what resources and support I have. And then it was never to diminish the rest or dismiss the rest, but it was about prioritizing those who feed into me as much as I can feed into them, because I know I can give. That was one thing I never had any question of. I know I have abundance to give.
Yeah.
Well, and what's coming up for me as you're saying this, Marvyn, it's like this sort of, when you got diagnosed, there was this great opportunity to go, okay, wait, my life makes sense to me now in a very different way than it did 30 seconds ago or a year ago or whatever it was. And so you took that opportunity to say, who am I? Who do I want to be? What a beautiful gift that you've made out of what a lot of people feel like is a struggle, a challenge, or whatever else. But you're like, okay, who do I want to be? I get to redecide what's important to me and how I want to be in the world. Was in model for my children. I mean, I don't mean to, I'm kind of Pollyanna-ing it. Was there a part of it that was about grief? Was it about, I mean, there's clearly a gift here. Was there other pieces
the
of
other
it?
side.
Yeah, I mourned for 5 years. Like my marriage, I mourned for most of the time. That was one of my favorite, most secure people and connections I had in the world. But functionally, there's very little alignment in terms of how we move forward, and it just caused a lot of stress between us both. Me wanting to be bigger, her wanting to feel safer, and how that plays out in every day-to-day scenarios can be earth-shattering. And then there's like rejection sensitivity, which you just have. So, I invited all of the people that were in my life at the time into the world I was in and what was going to be happening. And most of them were just like, no, it doesn't serve me. And so you're mourning the level of rejection on scale to the authentic part of yourself. But again, it just goes to show how much of an inauthentic life I created, trying to look and feel normal and typical. And so it was heavy mourning. And I think that's the part that people don't want to do. That's the part that people try to hold on to their original identity, because shedding it is so painful. The amount of days you cry, the amount of days you feel lost. And again, those 5 people, my brothers and my sisters as well as an extension of that, were the only people who were left. And I had to rebuild every single relationship with a consistency of behavior based on what I knew I could deliver. So in the end, it's beautiful, but those days where your inner voice is super active and it's not quieting down because it's telling you you're a bad person because people are now upset at you, or because they've said something bad about you because you're trying to save yourself. Like you have to accept a certain level of self-interest and what comes with that. But no one teaches you that from young. It's like share your football with everybody, but no one says when it's time to do the opposite and look after yourself. What do you do and how do you do that?
Protect your heart. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really painful.
So again, so much is coming up. I remember when I was diagnosed, first thing I did was I called my mom and I said, hey, Mom, guess what we've got? And then my dad was not happy with me, but since then that's been identified. And then I look back and it was like my whole life made sense.
Yeah.
And then I moved into grief. and I
Yeah.
cried for probably 3 months.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
totally feel that when you recognize all the ways in which you've been masking, and the language that's often used in the space that you're identifying is the ways in which we mask to appear normative.
Mm. Yeah, that for me, to say goodbye to the persona I created was really hard because it's a winning formula in a way.
Yeah.
You know it works. To be the funny, charismatic man. Because I know people. Like I actually had a model of it, which was Will Smith in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I modeled myself on him because he was the only example of a man who had all the things that I probably wanted when I was 14. And when you have to say goodbye to it, and it's also really interesting because then you model the life of someone like Will Smith and you watch him and you look at his arc and you start to see how even he had to shed the ideas that he had. And it's like, how can I be somebody who was acting as a person who he's not even being? And it just took a lot to really accept that, I built my personality off of ideas that aren't going to serve me. And who was the little boy that just wanted, love or wanted a hug or wanted to feel accepted, who wanted to be a football player and a superhero? Like, where is he? And I had to go back and find that little boy. And that was really tough because I'd forgotten a lot or
Yeah.
suppressed a lot, depending on how you want to see it.
Yeah.
So I
So
like it. Oh,
I
go
know
ahead.
we need to wrap. I'm just watching time and go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to take us a little bit of a different direction because we started talking about dadding at the very beginning. And there was something that you were talking about that I really want to highlight. And I wrote down two things. One is this whole thing about sitting on the sidelines and what that was like. And the other part of it is like, what's the message for the moms out there? Because a lot of the people that are listening are not dads. I just know our audience. Hopefully they'll share it with the partners in their world. But there was something in your story that I think was really important about how you were having a hard time as a dad engaging in the way that you really wanted to, is what I was reading into it. And so what's important about that, particularly for the moms
But
listening?
I think there's going to be a generation of men who are trying to repair the absenteeism that their fathers had, and they're going to have to repair that. Because a lot of the things that we speak about around fathers are not really speaking mother to father, they're speaking from mother to what I saw my dad do. And then they speak it into their husbands, and it recreates this really long cycle. A lot of men are struggling at scale. And actually, for me, it's a pandemic, it's a big problem. And men have completely disassociated from family and from creating unions with their partners across gender lines. Men are just tapping out because the vision of what that looks like to be successful in it comes at a great cost to them. We haven't married patriarchy meets family man meets capitalism. We haven't married that triangle.
Right.
So many men are just tuning out. When I say what's valuable for a mother to understand is how you involve a dad in participating. So giving him a small task to contribute on a regular basis. That's a space in an area that he can own however he wants. The however he wants it for me is incredibly important.
Yes.
If you're going to manage his way of doing the one thing that he does, he will lose interest and zone out. So it's super important that you invite them in and be like, however you want to spend this 2 hour window, you take our child out of the house and you do whatever you want. And it allows me space to recharge. That's my way of receiving love from you, is that at this time. And I think also then building upon that is really understanding who the men are that you're marrying, that you're in a relationship with. I think too often we don't ask questions, or if a man says, I grew up in this particular type of home, or I struggle with these particular types of things, it's still believed that they should deliver on the exact picture of family that we have in our heads, and it's not related to who we actually are as individuals. Man is not a homogeneous blob of experience. If you find a man who comes from a challenging home, who has ADHD, that means something in terms of the experience you're going to be getting. And that is obviously their job to do, but it's also your job to hear that a man is challenged by something. And yeah, for me, I think that was a massive thing. I also have a real challenge around sort of escalator relationships where people go in very traditional 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step relationships that are ushered by time and expectation of friends and family, and not by genuine development of two people's idea of how they can coexist together. And that's where you do get the imbalances and inequity of, women being more at home, more with the kids, cleaning and cooking and being Susie homemakers. And if that's not their gift, that becomes a horrible experience for the person. Everybody should sign up based on what they have and what they don't have. And it should be built around who you are, not on any external image of a relationship. And you'll find much better results that you can get out of men as a result.
So that is such a beautiful response. And I want to add to it and get your input on it, because one of the things that I found early as we shifted from more traditional roles into like, how do we co-parent? How do we coexist? How do we do this together? Was the realization that I had to stop treating my husband as a babysitter and start treating him as a parent, which meant I had to accept that he wasn't going to do it the way I was going to do it. And he had a right to do it his way, not the way I thought it had to be done. And that for me was a really hard work to do.
Yeah, and look, I think even you saying that creates capacity for people to understand that maybe it's almost presented as if, as a mother, your natural instincts are perfect, and
Yes.
and it's whatever you think is what we must do. And I can't explain to you some of the gifts that just a masculine energy, if let's forget men and women for a moment, a masculine energy can create for a child. And for a perfect example, bedtime, I find is that it's a sentence. And for their mother, it can be much more complicated because of the affinity and proximity that she has with the children. Sending them to bed becomes a conversation, whereas for me, it's a sentence, and it happens straight
With a
away.
period at the end of it. Yes.
At the end of it. And I'm never going to sit there and be like, I'm better at putting kids to bed than you are. What I'm saying is my gift is that particular area. Let me hold that down. Because when I say it, it happens. And that's the teamwork. But you can't then tell me that I have to read 5 books if I don't want to read 5 books. I think that's where the division of my area is mine and I do it my way successfully. Your area is yours. And I defer to you because I really trust you. So that's a really important thing to me.
Well, and there's this, we could have a whole other podcast or a conversation around this, but there's setting realistic expectations. There's all kinds of patterns that are created, particularly when you're in a relationship with someone who is more neurodivergent than you are. And, there's this sort of control mechanism that kicks in for all of us when we get scared that things aren't going to go the way that they're supposed to, and it's going to end up in, there's a whole myriad of things that are sitting underneath that. And what I'm hearing is you've got to let people stand up and be who they can.
Yeah. And look, I think it mirrors itself in terms of women going into the workplace, but there are programs and support networks for women leadership and, women back at work and all of those things. Companies spend money to advance that. There is no program to help men better at home. It's just kind of do it because it's the right thing to do. And so there's a lot of headiness going into that problem, but I can't use the same muscles to fix a work problem that I can do with my children. With people, they operate in the gray. You can't just say up and it means up. You have to really work with them to get an understanding and build a relationship over time. So for me, it's taken probably 4 years to get as close to my children as I now can feel it. Like I wake up, I feel their presence in my day. They're in my thoughts. I know their energy. I know when they're different size, their sounds, their passions. I know it intimately, and that takes time, and that takes a lot of work as well.
Well, and it takes intention. And part of what I've really, I've been working with ADHD for 30 years, my whole life, 15 years, depending on how you look at it. And what I've become really clear about in the last couple of years that you are modeling today in this very powerful presence is the role of intention in managing ADHD. That when we set intention, we can focus, create, follow through, all of that. Without the intention, we don't go there, right? What I'm hearing you in every aspect of your life, as a father, as a human being, as a thought leader, is all about you're extraordinarily intentional about what you see as important.
Yeah. You have to choose. Look, the societal frameworks don't work for you. That's literally the beginning sentence of all of it. And it's how we all adapt and try to solve problems differently. But it also makes us geniuses. You have so many genius moments as someone who has ADHD. I literally would, I think maybe 2 years before I got diagnosed, I would say as a sentence, like, I think I'm a genius and people must be stupid. I have no more ideas as to what on earth this disconnect can be, because when I speak it and I deliver it, especially in a working context, it happens, and it happens so well, and everybody sees it and they're like, wow, how did you do it? And then you tell them and they're just like, oh, no.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't want to work 12 hours days and hyper focus and read 19 books in a week and listen to audiobooks while I'm typing. Like, just, but that's how
Well, it works.
it works. Yeah, and then you realize that maybe something is wrong, and then you start going into genius mode. And then when you realize you're not a genius, you're just like, actually, because I can still get a parking fine and forget to pay it, so that no genius is doing that. So it's really good to have.
I don't know. I'm going to argue
Maybe.
that one.
I like to call it rapid sequential monotasking. We just
I
can move
love that.
faster between everything than everybody else.
I love that. Look, all language to make me feel better is all welcome, but also when it's clearer and it allows neurotypical people to lean in without judgment is such a progress. And I think the more we talk about it, the better it will come, especially for my children's generation. I'm pretty sure one of my children have ADHD, and it's too early to diagnose, but it's definitely present in some of their behaviors. I want them to be able to say that as a sentence in school at the beginning, and it have clarity and meaning and build capacity in people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we need to wrap the conversation. I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you've got a 6 and 8 year old child, it is not too early for diagnosis logistically. Your choice about whether you want to pursue that. But I don't want to let that land without saying a lot of kids are diagnosed around early school age years. And so once they're reading in particular, it's a great way to assess what might be a learning disability, what might be ADHD, et cetera. Anyway, I just had to
Put a commercial
moment there. But we do have to wrap this conversation. So, which is sad, but true. And I hope maybe you'll come back another time because it's been delicious.
Anytime you want me, I'm here.
Fabulous. Tell us how people can find out more about you.
You can find me at Discover with Marvyn, Marvyn, on Instagram. I'm also speaking regularly on LinkedIn, Marvyn Harrison, Marvyn. Harrison is in Harrison Ford. Yeah, and once you find me, you'll find all the other things that I'm up to and doing, and you're more than welcome to engage.
Awesome.
And the podcast for those listening who might want to find out more and listen more.
Please search for Dope Black Dads, the podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. It's also on YouTube as well.
And that is actually how we found you. So.
Oh, brilliant. I'm good.
Yeah, beautiful for that. How do we want to wrap this conversation? Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring in, or something we have talked about that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, look, I think ADHD is a superpower in many ways. And I think diagnosis is powerful if you're able to do that. I think it creates a lot of understanding and context as to the gifts that you have. And I think if you're loving somebody with ADHD, I think one of the most powerful things you can do is love them as they show up, and creating capacity to do that for that person, especially if it's your children. And that's a massive lesson that I've had, is to love them as they show up. And then what happens is you build this real support and belief in who they are, being of value and being okay as they are. And it's the love that I now get from my children and from the other people that I know in my community who are ADHD is literally life affirming, and it's made all the work worth it.
Beautiful. One of the things we teach is a concept called meet them where they are and raise the bar from there. And that's very much what it. Go ahead, Di.
No, I was going to say literally the exact same thing. And I think that what you just spoke into, Marvyn, is that meet them where they are. And we don't even need to deal with the raise the bar, but it's like just seeing and being with that human and letting them be who they are, rather than the focus on trying to fix or trying to make them more normative or whatever the thing is. You know, it's the being with them where they are that I'm hearing so loud and clear from you. And I appreciate that.
Okay, so we have one final question we like to ask our guests. Do you have a favorite quote or motto that you want to share with our listeners?
I do. So one of my favorite films is Eat, Pray, Love. And when she's on her journey, there's this Italian expression called dolce far niente, and it's the art of doing nothing. And when I heard it, and it was like referencing to people in the West just always having doing, and having things and chucking their diary. And for someone who's ADHD, I always chuck my diary full of things to do. And it's this thing of like, I now put time in my diary to do nothing. And then just to enjoy whatever arises while I'm doing nothing. And it's literally changed my life. So as an invitation to change my life, that particular language was perfect for me.
Can you say it again in Italian?
I'm going to try my best. It's dolce finita.
Finita. Beautiful.
Wow, thank you for that reminder. I had like that same moment, and I like try to channel Julia Roberts. Well, I actually read the book too, but like I have this picture of Julia Roberts reading the newspaper, doing nothing.
Well, again, this has been delicious. That's the only word I could use for it. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. You said earlier, and I share this enjoyment with you, the opportunity to facilitate great conversations around some of the more interesting, complex human challenges is one of the things I love about what we get to do. And to share that with someone else who sees the world similarly has been a true pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Diane, anything else you want to say as we wrap this conversation?
No, thank you, Marvyn, for being here. Before we wrap, those of you who are listening, take a minute to reflect on all the amazing stuff we talked about in this conversation. We went a lot of different directions, but grab for yourself a nugget, a gem. What is it that you most want to take away from this brilliant conversation we just had with Marvyn Harrison?
What insight do you have? Or maybe how do you want to bring that awareness forward with you into your life this week? And as always, friends, thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make an extraordinary difference.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast. Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.